Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM, the official podcast of Monsters.Rent. I'm Justin Lewis.
And I'm Tanner Weyland.
And we are here to help you tell better stories for yourself and your players as you dungeon master sessions of D&D, Dungeons & Dragons. We'd like to give you some quick announcements. We actually have one before the show, and then after the show, if you want to stick around, we have some more announcements then as well. But first, let's talk about this. Tired of being alone? Are you tired of not having any of your players understand you? Are you tired of never truly belonging? Well, you're in luck. All you need to do is join the Guild. The Guild is a unique and exclusive experience that is only open to Dungeon Masters. It is a full community focused on helping ease your DMing burdens. Want to meet other DMs? Join the Guild. Want to discuss your homebrew ideas with people who would appreciate it instead of just telling your cat? Join the Guild. Want to find a place where all your wildest dreams will come true? Join the Guild. Go to monsters.rent/guild and sign up today for free. Wait, that can't be right. Chuck, can you check this again? Is this supposed to be... What? Oh, they're serious? It's free? Oh, okay. All right. Yes, go to monsters.rent/guild and sign up today for free, even though they are crazy for giving this away for free. Common side effects may include burping, sneezing, laughing, breathing, hearing, listening, tasting, farting, critting, sarcasm, and in extreme cases, explosive diarrhea. Awesome. With that out of the way, we can get into today's show.
Hello, this is Tanner Weyland. Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM, the official podcast of Monsters.Rent. I'm here with Justin Lewis. Say hi, Justin.
Hi, Justin.
Hey, no, don't do that. I'm joking. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Perfect. So if anyone's new to the podcast, we are going to learn a bit about how to bring our DMing and storytelling to the next level. And today's podcast is kind of a thought experiment. Why don't we see more marriage and families happening, with your players' characters? Like, why aren't they starting their own little families and having little kids that they name and train and everything else, right? That's kind of the thought experiment, and finding out if, as DMs, we can do this and make it an enriching and enhancing part of an adventure. First off, Justin, what do you think about this topic?
I think it is an amazing topic. First of all, for those of you who don't know, I'm actually expecting my first child as this podcast releases. My wife's due date is August 4th, so it's like a week and a half away. So thinking about families is definitely the top of mind. And so I've been thinking of different book ideas that can involve having a baby or, just all sorts of fun ideas. And I think, and actually, on a different side note, my own campaign, my players have gotten pretty good. Like, they're pretty higher level, and it's hard for me to throw a balanced challenge at them without killing them. And so I was thinking, you know what, maybe I'll just give them like a baby, and they'll just have to deal with that,
Just do a little bit of just giving them responsibility, a cold, hard slice of responsibility, and see how they deal with it.
Exactly. I mean, the unfortunate part of doing that would be is how they treat NPCs thus far is not generally good. So I'm kind of afraid,
Well, that's perfect. I mean, in a way, that kind of speaks to one of the opportunities of making, player relationships actually lead to kind of emotional attachment. That speaks to it, right? Because it's like, you can tell different stories if the players feel emotionally connected. Because I think a lot of really great players will try and do that naturally. They'll try and be like, oh, let's find the emotional connection that would make my character actually want to go save this town or save this little girl who got kidnapped or something, right? But not all players are like that, right? And so kind of giving them that natural connection of like, hey, it's your wife, it's your fiance, it's your the girl in the town who you've been spending more time with, or your child. I think that that's just a very natural way to get player buy-in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that can also be a reason why dungeon masters might avoid the family, just because it might not feel earned, or you're trying to establish some sort of family relationship with a character, or sorry, not a character, with a player that generally doesn't do much role playing. And I mean, if you do that, there's a big chance that they'll be like, oh, hey, brother, okay, bye, right? Not a big payoff.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of leads naturally into what I want to talk about next, which is like, why don't we see this more often? And I think it's worth talking about from the player perspective and the DM perspective. For DMs, I think there's a few reasons. Frankly, I think that sometimes the subject matter might be awkward, because in order to create a relationship, you have to have flirting or dating, and some people are just maybe don't want to touch that because that's not something they're super confident with personally, or they don't want to role play flirting as an NPC with a player, because that can be a little uncomfortable too, right? Especially if that player or the DM, because DMs can be like this too, especially if they want to like talk about like some of the nitty gritty with like sex or anything like that, then it's like, ooh, you're gonna make quite a few people at the table uncomfortable, honestly.
Absolutely. Honestly, this kind of goes a little bit into, it touches on a topic that is connected to an episode I'm writing currently for later that deals with death, right? And allowing death in your game. And really, as a DM, you need to understand, and to understand, you have to ask your players what they're okay with, right? My personal group, and to be honest, myself, I tend to shy away from some of the more PG-13 R-rated aspects of playing D&D that could be in there, right? Just that's my natural personality. But even if it wasn't, I know that my group, that's generally how they would trend as well, right? We would prefer to stay away from some of the more scandalous, types of encounters you could have in D&D. But if you don't ask your players, you won't know, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think communication with players is key, because kind of jumping over to their perspective, I think that some players don't feel like they've got the metaphorical nod from the DM to be like, hey, you can pursue like some type of more relationship, a deeper relationship with this PC, because you're trying to flesh out your character. You can pursue that, and I'm actually going to yes and what you're doing, instead of being like, oh, I'm going to have this NPC not really show that much interest, or there's always going to be like an invisible wall of like, hey, what are you wasting your time here with? Let's get back to adventuring, And I think that if you have that kind of understanding, and you also do a little bit of push and pull with them, role-playing wise, then they'll feel more comfortable actually trying that, and that might be a hurdle that they're willing to get over.
Absolutely. And honestly, I think that should actually be some sort of an exercise that we as dungeon masters kind of take upon ourselves, because I know for me personally, when a character tries to flirt with another NPC or something like that, I might get uncomfortable, or I might make it kind of comical and pretty quick, right? But like you just said, taking it as a yes and moment and using it to spice up the plot, right? And actually one of the other points we were going to bring up was, when that happens, it could be a form of splitting the party, maybe spending too much time on one person. But using it as an exercise, you might be able to think of ways to kind of incorporate this NPC a little bit more. Maybe they decide to flirt with someone else, kind of creating a love triangle in the party, or they're doing it on purpose, trying to split the party, right? And they become kind of a more deviant aspect. Or you just find ways to incorporate other people in their own kind of side quests for love, I guess you could say, or relationships is a better way to say it.
Yeah, totally. And I like that idea of making it a multi-character thing, because I feel like that's another issue here is that if one person is like not obsessing, but like really focused on like, hey, I saw this barmaid and I'm gonna, every evening gonna go talk with her, then that's a time sink, and it's almost like, I think DMs already worry about one player kind of hogging the spotlight, and if one player has this kind of side relationship that's solely about them, where they want these long conversations back and forth, then it's going to get boring for the other players. It's going to feel like it's not worth it for them, and they're going to get annoyed. You're going to get annoyed that you're spending that time. And so I think that that's something that DMs need to be very cognizant of, right?
Yeah. And I think, we'll talk about a little bit of kind of some things you should and shouldn't do. And we'll definitely need to talk on this aspect of, if it is going to be a time sink, what are some things you can do to maybe mitigate that? But before we move on to some of our other points, one last reason why I think, we don't often see this, and both from a player perspective and a DM perspective, I think is because, at least in the US, we're conditioned to, they get married and they live happily ever after, end of story, right? Like that's the end of story, which if you've ever been married or started a relationship, right, marriage is the beginning of like a big adventure, right? And I think we need to recognize that we have that condition, right, in our brains, and recognize also that it's kind of hampering some of our creativity, because we're naturally prone to thinking you get a family and you settle down, right? But even in this modern day and age, we should get used to the fact that, a lot of people work remote, so you can technically have your family on the road, and why should D&D be any different, right?
Absolutely, because I think that some people worry that, oh, hey, my type of adventure doesn't fit. And it's true for some of them, right? If you have a campaign or a mini campaign that's a dungeon crawl, it's like, having, maybe your players could be related to each other, but, the player characters, but you're not likely going to have, NPCs in that position. But if it was an expedition or like, or one where you have like a town hub where you're doing adventures from, that's such a perfect opportunity, right? Especially, and we're going to have an episode soon about, how to do an expedition campaign, but in a setting like that, it's perfect because it's like, hey, you can have multiple NPCs on that, in the wagon train, on the boat, whatever it is, and that's a great opportunity also for, interacting with the same NPCs over and over again, and them really building a bond there. And I think you shouldn't shy away from that. I know it's easy to just focus on building the bond between, player characters, because that's wonderful. We all want a metaphorical Fellowship of the Ring, right? Where everyone's like, oh, they're so tight, right? But it's like, hey, but you can also have other kinds of relationships to just kind of flesh out the relationship meter, if you will, with player characters, and that's just going to make the story better in general. Absolutely.
I think when we say having a Dungeons and Dragons family, right, a family in your D&D campaign, we all too often, and we've even been talking like this, we all too often think about lover, right, wife, husband, child. But I think it'd be interesting to, throw in some dynamics like uncle, grandma, godfather, some
brother,
of those,
sister,
brother, right, cousin, because those bring sort of a small distance with them, but they can also bring somewhat of a familiarity, right? And I think that would be a very interesting aspect to add to your story.
Totally, right? And I think that it's worth talking about, how can you actually implement this well, right? Because I think it's something that we should all try. It gets us out of our comfort zone, but I think it adds so much more reality to the stakes in the world and also the connection. So first off, what I wouldn't recommend that you do when you're trying to get your players to have these kind of family ties, let's Let's keep in mind that you can have a lot of relationships, like Justin was saying, like in family, but then you can also have friend relationships, right? Like, when was the time that, the paladin in your party met another paladin in the city, and they went out for drinks, and then they also, went out to go, practice sword fighting together. Things like that can also add depth and an emotional connection, that if that, friend NPC got like taken away or hurt, suddenly you have like reason, you have an MO to like pursue the bad guy who did it, right?
Absolutely. And a couple words of warning with this. You won't always plan correctly. Like, sometimes your players will just randomly develop relationships with NPCs you never planned, and ones you did plan, they won't care. But also, as the DM, you will likely need to be vulnerable yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what do I mean by that? I mean, when, you're out having drinks with the paladin, right? The player is going to roleplay, or ideally they are, right? It's going to be somewhat hard for them to kind of develop those positive emotions if they don't, but they're going to roleplay, and so will you. And because of that, you will likely need to sort of immerse yourself in these emotions, right? Yeah. And it's possible that you will have to kind of be vulnerable as the character, which will make you vulnerable as a person, right? It's kind of hard to explain, but you're acting essentially, but in order to act, you sort of have to replicate those emotions in yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And as a DM, we're the ones that, like, the players have to do that for themselves. We have to do everyone else. And that's a big responsibility. But I think it's possible if you just let the character be interested in the player, like whatever that means, whether it's romantic or friendship or just interest in general. That kind of, it becomes a bridge that can then lead to something else. Because oftentimes I've seen this where, you do kind of develop a little bit of like, a little tryst or something, or a friendship, and then it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't affect the adventure. It doesn't, become a decision point, or something that the player actually feels like they need to spend real time on. And then that becomes essentially a trophy relationship, one that you just set on the, on the mantle and you don't really look at. And that kind of leads to players not feeling like like the DM's willing to tango with them in terms of actually developing real relationships, Yeah,
I 100% agree. I think one way to avoid that maybe, and kind of going on the lines of things you shouldn't do, don't make the NPCs that they're trying to have relationships with one-sided or static characters. Make them dynamic with their own desires, right? So maybe the paladins have drinks together. At some point, they find something that they disagree over, and that's going to provide an interesting point in the story, because hopefully they've built up a friendship. They have this disagreement, and they kind of have to learn how to navigate it, right? Or, this paladin has desires, and he calls upon the player character for help, just that they should feel somewhat real, right?
Exactly, and I think that's such an important point there, because that, as a DM, that could be a wonderful catalyst for like showing a player that, like, hey, you can develop kind of like a video game, how, some RPGs will have like specific partner characters, either for friendship or romance, and you can kind of tell because they'll have different kinds of options. One thing that you could do in terms of like making up is, have an NPC who has a similarity, and then after they've had some time to kind of develop that relationship, then have, like you said, that opposing view that maybe there's a little bit of a falling out or an argument. And then the next time that they see each other, which you should encourage, then if the player doesn't come up to them and do something, then your NPC, you should make them go up to the player and be like, hey, I'm sorry about that, I got heated, then they can share some about themselves. And then it can be a great opportunity to be like, hey, do you want to take this relationship like kind of further, or be friends still? And so it's almost like a 1-2 punch, where it's like, introduce them as a friend who shares interests, have a conflict, make up, and then that's almost like a good indicator to the player, hey, this can be more than just an NPC who gives you directions for the cave down the road, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think what you're talking about is it could be termed as like reciprocity, and that's not a great term for it, but like oftentimes I think, at least in my own campaigns, thinking back, the problems that I've had when I've tried to create these relationships for my characters, but they've turned out to be trophy relationships, is because I haven't showed interest from my characters, from my NPCs to the PCs, right? Or interest, or like I said, reciprocity. So to the PCs, it's like, oh, I wanted to talk to this person. They didn't seem like they wanted to talk to me, or we did talk, but then they haven't reached back out. They're not worth my time because it was one-sided, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you are able to give that back and forth with the player, then they're gonna pick up on it, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And if they don't, teach them, with time.
Exactly.
I think, but like, kind of what's the end goal? For me, I feel like the end goal of any kind of relationship that the players build in world, the end goal is that it's supposed to enrich the story. And so I would, and this is the kind of evil DM in me speaking, I would totally take advantage of these relationships, build them up, and then suddenly, oh my goodness, your baby just got kidnapped? Well, that's crazy. Ugh. Guess you better do something about that. I think there's so many things that you can do that, give an urgency and also real stakes, which, guess what? You can occasionally, like, oh, the players are chasing after the person who took their cousin, and guess what? The cousin dies. Then it's like, guess what? Your player has real, stakes and real, like, they want vengeance for what happened. And I think that's only a win, right?
Absolutely. I will say with this, definitely be careful and know your players, because it's one thing to kidnap a cousin. It's another thing it's one thing to kidnap the cousin and have the cousin die, right?
Yeah.
But it's an entirely different thing to kidnap a baby and have the baby die, right?
Exactly.
And you kind of have to gauge what your players will tolerate, but also what sort of maliciousness is in the villains. Because if the villain knows that they have a baby, depending on the villain, they'd go after the baby over the cousin all day, right?
Yeah.
So you definitely need to be careful with how you craft the story.
Exactly.
Because that could be a triggering event. The last thing I would also say is kind of like you said with having like a town hub or something where the family stays. If there is family, and I mean like immediate family, as a DM, it's probably helpful to know where they are at basically all times. And the more important they are, the more important the ability to see them often will be. So just add those methods into your campaign, whether it's teleportation or whether the fact that the family comes with the party or something, I don't know, right?
Absolutely. If you don't facilitate it, then it's going to go by the wayside, and all that character work that you did, you kind of wasted, right? So I think that's such great advice. And just to end here, I really liked your final advice. For me, I would just say that you need to try and find an opportunity, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes with this. You're going to not telegraph correctly that, like, hey, this is an NPC that you can do more with. You're maybe not going to be able to telegraph that well at the start, and even if you do, maybe you don't utilize that relationship super well. If you start now, then you're going to get better, and that's the key, because building up these relationships, or the skill as a DM to kind of build connections between player characters and NPCs, you got to start now, because it's not easy.
Absolutely. I can't say anything other than that. Well, I guess I can say one thing. Just reiterating, I challenge you, the listener, to try this. Try and add more family relationships into your sessions just to spice it up.
Yeah. And, thank you again, Justin, for talking about this with me. I always appreciate what you bring to the table.
Well, thank you, Tanner. I think you have really, really good ideas for episodes.
Yeah, I do. Hot dog. Thanks, Justin. Okay, yeah. And listener, thank you again for hearing us talk about this subject that maybe we care a little bit too much about. Not sure. But either way, we're happy you're here. And until next time, let's roll initiative.
Thank you for listening to today's show. We really appreciate your support and your patronage. We have a few more announcements to go over. First,
did you ever fall in love with the library as a kid? It was a place where you could experience 1,000 stories without having to buy 1,000 books. That is what Monsters.Rent can do for your D&D campaign. You can rent and swap out as many quality miniature monsters and creatures for your D&D party as you could ever want, without having to buy them. You can rescue villagers from a kobold camp, or lead your party through the fighting forest, or many more adventures. We're coming out with new bundles all the time. Just sign up for our subscription to get access to your own personal library of minis. Go to Monsters.Rent to find out more. That's the website. Monsters, with an S, .rent. Get your library pass to a world of minis today.
we also wanted to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Stardust and Dragons. I'm going to let one of the cast of Stardust and Dragons, Christian Hatcher, and his crew tell you a little bit more about it.
This August, a new adventure podcast is coming to a platform near you, filled with action,
Shoot one of the two of them. We can't keep taking hits like that.
drama,
Everything that she's been doing, everything she's going to do, finally sets in.
and stardust.
Help! Help! Someone, please!
Find out more about this epic odyssey at stardustanddragons.com, where adventure awaits in the stars.
That's all the announcements we have today. Again, thank you so much for everything you do for us. You make this show possible. Like we said before, we'll be back next week with another great episode, and until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative.